We are now very excited to offer you a chance to hear from leaders from some of the world's most successful global enterprises, including several that are Ontario-born and raised. Our Technology of the Future panel, which is supported by Lockheed Martin, is intended to provide a close-up look at how companies scale to this level of success and stature. Today's panelists will also look ahead to the technology of the future. I would like to introduce our panel moderator, Annette Verschuren, Chair and Chief Executive Officer of NRStor. Many of you may know her from her time as President of Home Depot Canada, where she took the company from $600 million in sales to $6 billion. She then wanted a new challenge and believed that areas that most needed solutions were water, energy, and food. Her next move was to create an energy storage company, NRStor. Having managed a major international company and now leading a new business that is in scale-up phase, who better than to moderate today's panel than Annette? Joining Annette are 5 panel members: Linda Hasenfratz, Chief Executive Officer of Linamar Corporation, a multi-billion-dollar global manufacturing company; Tom Jenkins, Chair of the Board of OpenText, a global leader in enterprise information management; Mark Henderson, Chairman of Ericsson Canada, a world leader in communications technology and services; Keoki Jackson, Chief Technology Officer for Lockheed Martin, a diversified enterprise and Canada's premier supplier of electronic defense and surveillance systems; and Geoff Smith, Chief Executive Officer of EllisDon, a world-leading construction and building services company.
Cuter than you.
Thank you, Tom. What a thrill it is to be here. What an event. 3,500 amazing people that are driving the economy and being part of this fabulous, fabulous event. I, like the Premier, like all of us on this stage, extraordinarily proud of our country, extraordinarily proud of what Canada is doing, what Ontario is doing to drive the economy. Here we are on our 150th birthday. What a gift it is to be here and to have our 2 champions, the Governor General, David Johnston, who is just an innovative driver, and Premier Wynne to cheer us on. Jared, you gave a great chat, very, very impressive. I am in front of an esteemed panel. I have 29 minutes and 12 seconds to get through this event. This is not going to be easy, but look, we're representing family-owned business, multinational companies here. Every one of us began as a startup, just like you are. And in 10, 20 years' time, you will be sitting in these chairs showing the next generation of entrepreneurs the way. I think all of us will bring a unique perspective in this 4th industrial, industrial revolution that we're in, but the tech advances happening are so exponentially faster than we've ever lived in, and what an exciting time this is. We talk a lot about barriers, but as an entrepreneur, I only see opportunities in this exciting, fast-changing environment. So I am going to start with a few questions, and why don't we start with you, Mark? First question, what does each of you see as the disruptive influences in your industry, and how are you dealing with them?
I guess I could take it easy way and say everything that Jared said.
Yes.
Is something, you know, as a multinational building most of the wireless networks around the world. I mean, we operate in 180 countries and we see this market by market. But I think closer to home, especially in the developed markets, the more advanced markets where the innovation is happening quicker, you know, mobile saturation, smartphone saturation, everybody put their hands up, they have one. Obviously, the advent of big data buckets, so they've sold everything they can. They can't charge you more money for it, and yet the use of data is just exponentially growing. Mobile and media are converging, so there's a lot of draw on videos, particularly over smartphone devices. So, you know, the operators are starting to look to video and IoT for revenue streams, which is a big change. We see them taking advantage of cloud technology, virtualizing their core networks, digitalizing their ICT back systems, a big move toward open source technology. and even in-house development, some of the tier ones. So all of those things combined for us are really pushing us to this next generation of networks that's coming to the market in the next 3 or 4 years to really address the massive data growth and the massive amount of devices and sensors that are going to be out there in the future. So that's really what's pushing the design cycle for us.
Very cool. So I'm going to ask Geoff Smith, you know, one of our great entrepreneurs, running a gigantic company in the construction industry. It's where they started. Tell me how you see these disruptive influences in your industry and how you're dealing with them, Geoff.
So everybody, I think I'm up here because I'm the oldest fashioned, most resistant to change, old school company, period. So they said, let's get a dinosaur up here and see what he says. I'm your guy. But we can't avoid, what we know and is we cannot avoid this any longer. Silicon Valley is coming after us. They're coming after us, I use Silicon Valley obviously in quotation marks, but they're coming after us in 2 ways. Obviously our industry, after years of being decades, centuries of being the same, is going to get automated by robots. We're going to get automated by 3D printing and new kinds of materials that we've never seen. But we're also going to cleave into 2. That's one. The other one is all the knowledge, all the data, all the entrepreneurial stuff going on. And I think companies like mine, and frankly all our clients, are going to have to completely change. We're going to have to decide, are we going to be a factory owner with the robots and everybody else, or are we going to be the entrepreneurs, the risk takers, and the data people? You've got a choice to make, but one way or the other, within 5 years, construction costs are coming way down, I believe, but everything about us is going to change, and most of us, I believe most construction companies that you see, all their signs out there now, won't be here in 10 years.
I remember the first conversation, we were talking, why are we building these big parking lots under these buildings when we're going to have autonomous cars? Like, we got to rethink.
I just built a house with a 2-car garage. I'm the biggest idiot in the crowd. I don't know why, but you're exactly right. Everything is changing.
Everything's going to change.
What we're building and how we're building it.
Yeah. Tom, over to you. Tom Jenkins runs the 9th largest in the world IT company, correct?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah,
Cool.
well, what we're seeing, again, as has already been talked about and what you're experiencing, we're seeing an increasing pace of change in our world where we started on the internet and we managed for many of you in this room and throughout the world, a lot of your interactions, whether it was for regulatory purposes or litigation purposes, but all those archives, all those content management systems, they're all being converted to data lakes, as you might imagine, which is both an opportunity and a threat for many of us in the room because a lot of those predictive analytics are doing the work of human beings. And we are busy converting a lot of our ingest of data to machines. Because one stat that perhaps you may or may not be aware of that has been mentioned today, we're getting ready for the 1 trillion machine world. And it's coming upon us very quickly. So we're very busy getting ready for that world. We're doing a lot of machine-to-machine communications and on-ramps. And just hang in there for the ride, folks, and just keep being creative and curious, as the Governor General had mentioned. And you know, as you know, as entrepreneurs, we always like to look for the opportunities. There are a lot of threats there, but there's a lot of opportunities.
There certainly is. And my friend Linda, we're both daughters of immigrants that came to this country, lucky us. Tell us what you're doing to respond to the opportunities in your industry and how you're dealing with them.
Yeah, I mean, we think it's incredibly exciting what's happening. I don't see it as disruption at all. I see it as opportunity, as it's really reshaping our business. We're a manufacturing company. We make primarily auto parts and access equipment. And we see the whole area of artificial intelligence and machine learning as really transforming how we're making products. And it's a transition that has been going on, obviously, for quite a few years, but is accelerating now with the opportunities that we're seeing in terms of collaborative robots, more advanced robotics, to do work that couldn't be done before. But it's interesting because I look at our company and how it's changed just over the last decade. Yeah. You know, I remember 10 years ago, we would have 2 people what we would call direct employees. So those are folks on the shop floor loading and unloading machines for every indirect employee, which was everybody else. Today, that ratio is 1.3 to 1. So it's very rapidly changed that we have actually a lot more indirect people supporting those direct shop floor folks. And what's really important, by the way, is our overall employee base has tripled. Okay, I mean, today we're a little over 25,000 people. I mean, 10 years ago we were a third of that size. So it's not that jobs have disappeared. It's not that there's massive unemployment. In fact, we have huge employment in Guelph, and it's the lowest unemployment in Canada. So it's not that people don't have jobs, they just have different jobs, which is important from the perspective of training and skills development and the education that people need. The jobs are changing, they're not loading and unloading machines, they're doing tool development, they're doing robotics, they're doing maintenance of that equipment, they're process improvement, and frankly, a lot more interesting and stimulating jobs than what they were before.
Yeah, and this lady looks for innovation, I'll tell you. I had the great experience of working with her to build one of the first battery lawnmowers years ago, and she's always looking for ways to grow her business, and I think that's a critical and important part of innovation. Keoki, tell us at Lockheed Martin what you're doing and how you're responding to the changes in this world.
You bet, Annette. Well, let me maybe take a step back here and note some really overarching trends. First, and you heard a little bit of this in Jared's presentation, but the threat environment, Lockheed Martin, of course, we're the premier global national security provider. The threats that our nations face and our allies face are evolving extremely rapidly. And you see that from rogue nations like North Korea and the quest after nuclear weapons, intercontinental ballistic missiles. You also see this in non-state actors, think ISIL in the Middle East and the terrorist threats that are posed there. And of course, these threats now are not only in the physical space, but they're really moving more and more into areas in the non-kinetic, the cyber world, as we heard earlier. So the next thing that I'll note, when you look at how things are changing, there's a whole brand new world of companies and entrepreneurs, and I'll take the new space industry, for example, with billions of dollars going into brand new, not necessarily new technologies, but brand new business models. And finally, I'll note, just in a handful of areas where these used to be primarily funded by governments, U.S. government in particular, so take advanced electronics, advanced manufacturing, data analytics, autonomy. Now today, for every dollar of government money, there's maybe $100 or even $1,000 of R&D money going in from the commercial sector, and that's a global commercial market there. And so what we've realized is, first of all, we need to actually be figuring out how to move much faster just because of all of these things that are driving us from every angle. We've also noted that we can't just look within our own walls, and we have to be outside the four walls of Lockheed Martin and really being in that global marketplace of technology and participating in all the innovation there.
Very cool. You know, when I left Home Depot, I went around the world with my husband, and I saw three things, as Tom pointed out. I saw food, energy, and water being extraordinarily important to sustain this planet. And I see, you know, energy and electricity and how that's delivered and the autonomy that customers are looking for to control their own destinies. And I see this world changing dramatically, you know, in developed and undeveloped worlds. In undeveloped worlds, they're going to skip the whole grid building and the infrastructure that's being built, just like they did in the telecommunications in many places, as Jared described in China. So I just see, at the end of the day, a very exciting opportunity in the business that I'm in. I'm developing energy storage projects, from residential to microgrids to large connected to the grid energy storage technologies, and promoting two Ontario-made energy storage technologies, HydroStor and Temporal Power, great Canadian companies. But I think, you know, I see this world changing so quickly. I'd love to ask you guys the question, where do you see us headed in terms of the next wave of technology, and how does your industry look 10 years down the road? Mark, we'll start with you.
Well, from the wireless point of view, you know, we've spent the last couple of decades connecting everybody else, and now we'll connect everything else. And I think it's important for people to realize that the network technology that will enable that is quite different than what's out there right now. The standards that are being addressed globally that'll come to fruition over the 18 months are talking about capabilities like 100 times the data, right? 1,000 times the volume, 5 times less the latency. Massive number of devices, which actually brings the cost of modules down and battery life extended greatly. So if we're going to put sensors in the middle of the roads to monitor traffic flow and ice buildup, they're going to have to sit there for 10 years. And the idea that you have one core network that's virtualized with what we call network slicing, so you're able to connect a device to an application and actually stand up a connection that what latency does it need, what security does it need, what quality of service does it need, really opens up and touches every industrial segment. So you go all the way from massive IoT, which is really many devices, low cost, low energy, things like smart buildings, metering, to critical IoT, where you're starting to look at all availability, ultra reliable, high latency, or low latency, sorry, a lot of data, moving into things like autonomous driving, traffic monitoring, et cetera, remote surgery. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole end of the scale, and one network being able to connect and put those things together across a common core. And that's really opens up a tremendous amount of opportunity from an innovation point of view. Right. Efficiency from an industrial segment point of view, because it'll touch everything, and then competitiveness regardless what category you're talking about. And that's really where we're spending the most of the time, because we see these things really starting to be deployed 3, 4, 5 years from now. Yeah. In a big way.
It's exciting. And all those applications, to all that you described, there's enormous innovation opportunities. Tom, what do you see?
Well, what we're getting ready for is the rise of the machines. Machines are going to break down into 2 areas, the way you've said. We're going to get very slow, low energy IoT devices that are every once in a while going to update us. And then we're going to have high burst, really fast, nanosecond that we already see today in financial services. And so the challenge for us and what we're trying to do within our architectures is get ready for that world. It's a world where, you know, quite frankly, we humans, if you're a peer-to-peer trader in New York with London, you know, a human trader can't keep up. A machine trader will do in 1 second 36 years that a human trader would do on a derivatives desk. So we're getting ready for that world, whether it's regulatory governance, et cetera. We have to do a lot of principles-based thinking about how this new world's going to look like, because we as humans want to be able to project our ethics, our morals, our judgment, as Jared was saying, onto that world. And so we're getting ready for both the really, really slow, low energy stuff and the really fast, high burst. There's sort of 2 ends of this that we're getting ready for.
So you've really got to work with government and non-for-profit and business really working together.
Well, it was a big discussion in Davos this year as to you cannot make rules-based law because the platforms are changing so rapidly, as you were saying about networks. You really have to have principles-based law. And the jurisdictions that do that will do extremely well.
Yeah. Jeff, what is your business going to look like in 10 years? And you know, what new waves of technology will really influence?
What's really going to change, I think, is what we build. And without, at the risk of being at 50,000 feet, everybody used to think, still does, of buildings, especially office buildings, hospitals, as these great physical, you know, blobs that people have to adapt themselves to. What we're going to do, in fact, Annette, you and I are talking about doing it together, is build buildings that adapt to people. So you've all heard about intelligent buildings, but it needs to go beyond that. It needs to go to buildings that somehow become an extension of the people that work there. We have to design them and build them that way. It's completely the opposite of the way we traditionally think. Secondly, our industry is about 15% of the GDP. We are about 30 or 40%, I can't remember the number, of carbon emissions. And in the way we build things and what we build, after we're finished building. It's disgraceful, and it needs to change, and it will change. Sustainability will be baked into every aspect of what we do, or the planet won't survive. So those are the two big changes.
Yeah, amen. Well done. Linda? Yes.
I'll take it.
You take it. Linda?
Yeah, it's an interesting point you bring up about the inefficiency of buildings being such a contributor, 30 to 40%, that I think so many people don't understand. And they look at, a big part of my business is automotive, which, by the way, is 6% of global emissions. And yet it's where everybody, has such focus and not enough really on the building side, where I think there's huge opportunity. So let's just look at the automotive part of our business, because I think that's an area of enormous change. Obviously, in just broad terms around mobility and how we're getting around, car sharing, potentially, the move towards autonomous in certain areas or more broadly. The types of propulsion, so today largely internal combustion engine, in the future alternative types of propulsion, whether it be electric or fuel cell or hybrid or something else. There's a lot that's happening that's changing, and I think it's not well understood. And people have leaped to conclusions around what that future is going to look like without having really thought through what's practical and what's really going to work. And I think it's so important for us to think about that, as we evolve into that future. One example is the electric vehicle. I mean, I talked to somebody not long ago who told me he wanted to buy an electric vehicle because he wanted to have a zero footprint. And I said, well, how do you figure that's a zero foot? Where do you think the electricity comes from? It's not zero emissions either. And it's interesting because in the US or China, where we have primarily coal-fired electricity, the well-to-wheels emissions of an electric vehicle are not dissimilar to that of a diesel engine, an internal combustion engine. So you're actually not doing anything for the environment in those scenarios. In Canada, it's a little different because we have a lot of hydropower and renewable power, so it does make a difference, but it's not zero. And we need to understand that. We need to think cradle to grave. We need to think about what's it mean, autonomous vehicles. A lot of people think, oh, that means dramatically fewer vehicles on the road because people only drive their cars, 8 or 10% of the time. But that's not necessarily true unless you're also willing to share, right? Because we can't all, you don't reduce the number of vehicles by 90% unless, everybody's okay getting to work and school sometime between 8 and 2. So, we have these peak demand times that we have to think about. And I think there's not enough thought going into all of that. There's a lot of, assumptions being made and statements being made around what's going to happen. But we do have to think about the practical side of how do we get everybody to work and school at the same time. And if it is autonomous, then, where are those vehicles going to go? You made the comment, why do we need parking garages? If you don't have somewhere for those vehicles to sit and wait, they took all those people to work, and if you're going to send them all out someplace, then they've all got to come back and get those people again. So that's maybe not practical either. So, the whole thing is there's so much change, and I think it's exciting because it means there's going to be a lot of opportunity, and we certainly see it as an opportunity as we try to grow our business into some new propulsion areas and try and get involved in autonomy and how do we utilize some of that technology to improve the safety of the vehicles so that we're taking signals from the vehicle in front when it hits some ice so that we're doing something in the vehicle behind to make it more safe. So there's so many exciting things that are happening, but at the same time I think we really need to think through the practical side and the sort of common sense side of how do we make this all happen, and therefore what does that future look like?
I think it's absolutely, I think there has to be just as much innovative technology in traditional companies as in our new companies. And I think that's where all of you come in. And so one of the things that I always loved doing was creating innovative environments where it gave people big sandblock boxes to play in, define what was loose, what was tight. And I really tried hard when I was running big companies as well to get that innovation. And so my next question is, how do we introduce more innovation into our companies and allow the brains that we have, that we're developing in our communities, greater input to that? And so I think one of the big challenges traditional companies, large companies have, is gaining that, finding ways to introduce that innovation from places that are so new and exciting. So I'm going to ask Keoki to start that conversation.
Yeah, if you think about Lockheed Martin, we've got some incredible engines for ingenuity. You think about the Skunk Works, our advanced technology centers. And Jared really said it earlier. We think about innovation more about how to harness the power of 60,000 engineers and scientists across Lockheed Martin. So things like Open Innovation Challenge to solve some of our customers' most difficult problems. What we're finding increasingly is we can take the same technologies that are going into our products. So take autonomy, big data, artificial intelligence, and say the F-35 helmet where you're presenting all the information that pilot needs right there on that screen, where literally they can look through the aircraft at the world around them. Taking those same kinds of technologies now to the factory floor, like our collaborative human immersive laboratory, to restructure our factories and how we build our products virtually before we ever turn a wrench or put a fastener in place. And I'll give another example. You talked a little bit about energy, and so we're heavily invested in looking at new ways to do storage, to amplify the impact of renewable energy usage, but also new ways to essentially go closed cycle and reuse and recycle through bioenergy and waste to energy, and actually doing some research here in Canada on both new materials to make that process more efficient and new feedstocks that we could take these, for example, into the far north. And the same technology we're using there, we're actually using to power one of our plants in Owego, New York. And so we've got this Concord Blue technology actually driving our own factories, because sustainability, as was noted, it's not just important for the planet, but it also turns out to be great business as well. So just a couple of other things that we're doing. We're really working hard with our customers day in and day out to understand what changes their missions, and then that's where we put our energy. So whether it's wargaming and ops analysis or very focused visioning with those customers. And lastly, you don't have to go further than the room across the hall here, and literally hundreds of booths of entrepreneurs and innovators to understand how we're thinking about reshaping our future. And so taking these technologies that are literally global, I'll give an example of Sikorsky, who's a leader in intelligence systems, autonomous systems. They actually go out with open entrepreneurial challenges. We're in our 8th one right now, it just kicked off. And so maybe I'll just finish up and say, we're accepting ideas in areas like microelectromechanical netted sensor systems right now. And so if you have inputs on those kinds of things, we invite you to help Lockheed Martin solve these difficult challenges.
It's great. Inviting innovation in, I think it's key. How have you been doing it, Tom, and how do you see it going forward?
Well, for those in the audience, we're doing that from a Canadian perspective in Waterloo. And although we've become a billion-dollar multinational, I think you want to also keep to your Canadian roots, but still have vision. And I think many of you have that global vision, because that'll drive the goal of your innovation, but keep your Canadian humility, because you have to be humble when you do this. And what we've done over the last few years is started a venture capital firm. We've also joined the Venture Capital Action Plan, so that we bring, we're one of the biggest investors of research and development in Canada, but we're still reaching out outside the company to bring the ideas in, because innovation also comes from good old competition. So you want to make sure that you've got lots of different places that you're getting those ideas to drive the vision, keep the vision global, and also think about acquiring. many of you are small companies, you're pre-going IPO, you still can think about that and group together. And remember, stay humble, stay humble. The idea next door may be better than your idea, embrace it.
It's terrific, Tom.
That's
Great
terrific.
advice. One of the great pieces of advice Linda Hasenfratz gave to President Trump recently when we were down giving him advice on how to advance women entrepreneurs and women business leaders was, she said to the president, did you know that an average part goes through a border 8 times before it eventually gets into a car? And the president looked, and I don't think he knew that. And so we were talking about border taxes and the implications of that. And but this woman has, how many companies do you have outside of Canada? How many, we talk about export.
We have 58 globally,
Yeah.
of which 23 are in Canada. So a little more than half of our company is global.
Yeah.
And I think that's such good advice that Tom gave, to think globally. To many of you out there who are starting businesses, I think create bold goals, because if you set small goals, you achieve small things.
Right.
And if you achieve big goals, you'll achieve big things. And create a broader scope for your business than maybe you initially think. That doesn't mean you do everything at once. You can have a plan that starts here and is going to move out towards this broader scope, but think broadly and think globally. You know, when we were chatting before the panel, and I was talking about countries that are punching above their weight in terms of going global and creating enormous companies out of small countries. And I think a great example of that is Sweden. Sweden has a very small population, so when they go to create a new product, they have to think global. Their own market is not big enough to sustain a significant business. So right from the outset, they're thinking global. I need to think about the architecture of, let's say it's a software that can be in multiple languages. I need to think about, this product from a whole bunch of different perspectives. If I'm in North America, I'm in Europe, I'm in Asia, how am I going to handle it? That doesn't mean you launch with all of that in it from day one, but at least you're thinking about it. So you're building an architecture that can be taken global. I think that's really important.
So do I.
And just along the last question as well around innovation and how do you create it in your companies. I think that Jared said something very important, that you need to make innovation part of what every single person in the company does, and that's what we've tried to do. We've tried to encourage idea generation. Of every single employee. We have a target of 6 implemented ideas per person per year, and we're achieving it. That means we're implementing, 140,000 ideas a year. Some of them are small ideas, but some of them are more fundamental. And we're also trying to do what you guys have talked about, to go out and, learn from others, go places like this, meet companies with interesting technologies that we can learn from, maybe invest in, maybe be a manufacturing partner for. I've already got a card today.
Yeah.
And I think the last thing I would say is keep your companies nimble. Don't let them become bureaucratic. I feel like I fight bureaucracy every day in our company, because there's always somebody who wants to create another rule, another signature, another process. That just weighs you down and makes it hard to implement change. So, I've got some props here. This is our global policy and procedure manual. This is it. There's 9 procedures on it. You can read them. You can read them with the naked eye on a piece of paper this big. And, and then we tell people that the rest is up to them. The rest is up to our plants and our groups as to how they run their businesses. And I think that keeping it flexible that way is really, really important to being able to implement change.
It's terrific. I'm going to last comment to the most senior guy on the. Is it going to steal the policy? But Jeff, why don't you close it out with that question? What's your company going to look like in 10 years, and how are you going to make it happen, and how are you going to attract these types of brains to your organization?
Well, you're right. It's all about people. Again, at 50,000 feet, we just try and make EllisDon as wide open as possible. We give everybody all the information. We give them the business plan. We give them the strategic plan. We give them all the weaknesses and strengths, and then we make everybody accountable to each other. I was listening closely to Jared when he said, don't create a separate division.
Yep.
We've had a hell of a time, and I agree with that. We do have an engineering and R&D division, but what we've done is we've made them accountable to everybody else in the company. They're not accountable to me. They have to get up in front of everybody in the company, superintendents, project managers, and say, this is how I made your life easier. And if they can't get the approval of those people, they don't exist. So I think wide openness and big time accountability.
What a panel. What a bunch of great entrepreneurs. Thank you so much.